Welcome back. The BRICS Ministers of Agriculture Summit has wrapped up this past weekend. Agreements were signed there, including on working together on sustainable agricultural production, improvement of access to food by those in need, as well as increasing trade and investment within the BRICS bloc. For more on this, let's speak to the CEO of Agri SA Christo van der Rheede. Christo, a very good evening to you. Grateful for your time. So take us through the most beneficial aspects of these arrangements for the domestic agriculture sector.
Let me first give you an overview of the amount of people that live in the BRICS countries. It amounts to approximately 40% of the world's population. And secondly, the BRICS countries, they represent approximately, or they contribute approximately 26% to global GDP or the global economy. So it's a substantial market. We're already exporting fruit and vegetables, meat to China and some of the other BRIC partners. But overall, there's huge potential to expand that market. Currently, we export a huge amount to Africa, Europe, United States, and BRICS only receive approximately 99% of our total exports. So the potential is there, the people are there. It all depends on how we then put a trade agreement together so that South Africa benefits, but those countries also benefit.
And why is it, given how long South Africa has been part of BRICS, that we've not been able to fully exploit the agricultural opportunities when you consider that much of the trade in that vein is still done with continental Europe, with the Americans?
I think historically we've had very good trade relations with Europe, with Britain, also United States, and we have really made the most of those trade relations. Remember also the United States provided us with a AGOA framework which allowed us to export our goods to the United States in many instances tariff-free. So that obviously provided a huge benefit for our exports to the United States. I think our bigger challenge with the BRICS partnership is that we haven't really focused on what I would say a utilization strategy. In other words, how do we make the most of this trade agreement that exists within the BRICS framework? I think one of our biggest challenges obviously was to ensure that we get a sustainable and a more fair tariff regime, because I think that was one of the biggest stumbling blocks up to this point, and I trust that the ministers have agreed to a more workable trade tariff agreement, because it's no use you want to export but your exports are blocked due to high tariff rates.
So as things stand for agriculture businesses in South Africa, it's still much better to do business with so-called Western nations, am I right?
Indeed, but I think there was a very good agreement signed between the various ministers, agriculture ministers. Our own minister, Rheede, she was present. And I think the focus areas are areas that can really take trade forward. One, the focus on climate change, because climate change poses the biggest threat for agricultural production. Secondly, how do we make agricultural produce more affordable and accessible to the poor? How do we exchange technology between these various countries so that we can increase our agricultural output? And how do we make sure that we have a balanced trade agreement so that you don't have a one-way sort of traffic where only one partner benefits?
Right.
Currently, we have very good trade relations with China and even with Russia. India and Brazil needs to come on board.
With that in mind, Christo, how much of the global questions you think better agricultural cooperation between the BRICS member countries would be able to answer? By that I mean, for example, the issues around the grain deal with Ukraine. Much of the developing world is reliant on Ukraine, much of that grain not able now to get out because the agreement between the Russians and the Ukrainians has collapsed. When you look at South Africa, there's the issue to do with AGOA and whether or not the Americans will sign on, and not just sign on, but do so to an extent to which this country would benefit fully from that setup. How much do you think more BRICS cooperation would be able to address some of those issues?
I think it's critical that South Africa, when South Africa claims that it has a sort of neutral position, that we do not, at the end of the day, find ourselves in a situation where it can be seen as we embed with the Russians, or that we sort of support the Russian invasion into Ukraine. There's nothing wrong to be neutral, but it's important that we maintain our trade relations with the Western world, and that we strengthen our trade relations with the Eastern world. We cannot be seen or allowed to find ourselves in this geopolitical quagmire, which will be of no benefit to South Africa. Mm-hmm. But I think what is more important for me is that we should focus on the SADC region as well. South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, Botswana, Mozambique, we have huge potential in terms of agricultural production. We supply the world with minerals. But what is the big challenge? We send our wool to China, it comes back as clothes, or a final product. We send our iron ore in raw form to other countries, it comes back as steel. And we cannot continue along this way. We need to have our own industrial policy. We need to take hands with SADC countries so that we can build our own industrial economy. Yes, it's good to trade with the rest of the world, but we remain dependent to the extent that many African countries are now in serious trouble. Right. Despite all the land and all the good weather, climatic conditions, they still depend on grains from the Ukraine instead of growing their own.
And would Agri SA then, Christo, believe that for Africa, for South Africa as the only African state within the BRICS formation, there would be strength in numbers because the likes of Zimbabwe, whom you've referenced, and some other countries within SADC have expressed an interest or at least toying with the idea of seeking BRICS membership. So you think if there were more African states within the organization, would be able to benefit further than what we've been able to do as the sole African member?
I think there's a big appetite. Some African countries already indicated that they want to be part of BRICS. I see Argentina, also United Arab Emirates, as well as Saudi Arabia, also some other countries want to be part of BRICS. So obviously, if we can build BRICS to the extent that we grow the number of people that will be dependent on agricultural products and other products from South Africa and Africa in particular. But it's important that Africa gets its house in order, because it's no use, as I've said earlier, it's a one-way traffic trade regime where at the end of the day goods are being dumped on the African continent, and we have actually nothing to contribute that will benefit our own people. We need to have a balanced trade partnership because and we need to ensure that our people benefit. But I want to see African countries come together and speak with one voice, and also ensure that there's intra-trade, intra-regional trade, and that we have an industrial policy that will lead to a much more beneficiation, because we can no longer continue on this trajectory that we export all of our raw products and we import finished goods. Who suffers? Our people, because look at where our unemployment rate is at this point in time, and that is because of a poorly implemented trade policy, as well as a national budget that focuses more on welfare as opposed to wealth creation.
Christo van der Rheede, CEO of Agri SA. Good to have your time. Thank you.